What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over some more with our enemies and AI. In this particular episode, I want to cover giving experience to players when defeating enemies. As you can see, my experience bar is half full from defeating that one pumpkin golem, and now I want to defeat this other one as well and reach level 2, exactly. On top of it, I've disabled collision and removed the health bar from enemies that are defeated, so I can also no longer defeat them again. We were doing that before to show off some quest progression, but now we have two enemies in here and our system is working as intended. So I can honestly just use these two separate pumpkin golems and be good with it. A few other things here that we're going to support that you can't directly tell right now. I'm going to show off how we can give experience to all the players that ended up injuring or damaging an enemy that died, which I know is useful for a lot of multiplayer RPGs and a lot of multiplayer games in general. When you defeat an opponent, you know, you don't always have to be, it's either the one who gets the last kill or who picks up the experience who drops, or they share it. In this case, I'm going to show sharing it between the players. All right, so today should be a pretty fun episode. I enjoy this sort of thing. I'm looking very much forward to it, and it should be pretty simple, so we'll jump right into it. Now, before we do get started, if you'd like to catch up, I believe this is episode 23 or 24 of the Action RPG tutorial series. It's quite a few episodes into the third-person tutorial series as a whole, so I'll link that entire playlist here, but there are quite a few episodes before this that could be useful. But I'll try and do my best to explain it all here if you don't want to check those out. I will go ahead and link this episode right here, which is where we set up the initial enemy and AI, which you probably will want if you haven't done this, just so that you know your collision settings are correct and other things like that. Okay, so here we go. First things first, we have to assign a few things in the code. So if we go into the code, and specifically go to our default enemy class, default enemy.h, we need to update two things. First of all, we need to know what characters are going to be rewarded with experience, or if we're going to give them loot upon defeating an enemy as opposed to them picking it up, whatever. We need to know what characters are going to receive those rewards. Now, you could simply put in a character reference here, or if you want to award multiple characters, say multiple characters worked on defeating that enemy, then what you can do is make a T-array of your base character class, like I've done here, and call it characters to reward. Now, to do this, you will need to include this class in your default enemy.h file. So up at the top, I've included third-person tutorial character.h, which again, this is my base character that the characters will be, or the players will be playing as. So I've made a T-array of that class. I've made it a pointer, which is what the asterisk is. And I've just called it characters to reward. So this will keep track of everyone who's ever damaged this opponent. Alright. And then I've also added a float EXP worth, or experience worth. Basically, how much experience will this enemy or object give when the player or one of the characters destroys it? How much should they earn off of this? Now, this is in the default enemy, so this is really just a wrapper class. So we don't really have to give a specific value for the worth. But we can do all the logic in here, and then we can set the specific EXP worth for each individual class, each individual enemy. If you go into default enemy.cpp, you can see I've set the EXP worth to be 0.0. That way, like I said, the base class doesn't award any experience, and then it'll be chosen class by class. You could give a default amount of experience, though, if you'd like. Okay. And now we're going to change our take damage function in here. So if you go back into the .h and look at our take damage function, you can see it's not quite the same as it was in the past. Before, we had void take damage with the damage amount, and that was it. Now I have this whole extra parameter here. A third-person tutorial character pointer, character responsible, equals null pointer. And what this is doing is this is allowing me to determine what character is the instigator or the reason that this default enemy is taking damage. By setting it equal to null pointer in the parameter list like this, we're doing what's called a default parameter, or giving it a default value. Thus, when you call take damage, you don't actually have to pass it this. So say the enemy falls. They fall from a good height and they take damage. In that case, it's not necessarily a character that is responsible. It could be if you launch them off using a rocket or something like that, but that's getting a little advanced for now. So say they just walked off a cliff on their own and they take damage from the fall. Well, a character isn't necessarily responsible here, and so maybe we don't want to give experience to the player. We could, but if you don't, this is how you could avoid it. If you don't pass a second parameter in here, so you can write this in your header file just like this, but when you call this take damage function, whether it be another code class or a blueprint, if you only give it the damage amount and you don't fill out the second parameter, this is going to be null pointer, which is basically an invalid pointer, or a pointer that hasn't been filled out or assigned yet. And so if we have that, well, nobody will be receiving experience. Or really, we won't be adding any characters to the array of characters to reward. And thus, if they end up dying without having any elements in that array, then nobody will be receiving experience. So if we go to default enemy CPP one more time, then we go back to take damage. We update our function. You don't have to put in the default stuff in the CPP file. It already knows that it's a default parameter based on the equals that we did in the .h. But you do need to add this parameter, just like this. And then I've written a little comment here. It says, if there is a character responsible for dealing damage to this enemy, add them to the array of characters eligible for the rewards. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So we only want to track each individual player once. If you wanted to do it based on how much damage they did and things like that, you could also handle that. But for me, I'm being generous to the player. So as long as you did damage to this enemy, you will get experience for that enemy. So we check if character responsible, if this variable. Now, if this is null pointer, this will fail and no one will get added to the array. But if this is a valid pointer, if we did pass something into it, and this is valid, then it's going to take our characters to reward T array, add unique, and then this pointer. Add unique ensures that this element is not already in the array. If it is, it doesn't break or fail or anything. It just doesn't add it to the array. And if it doesn't add it, then that means each player can only be added once, or really each character can only be added once, which is what we want in this case. We don't necessarily want to reward the same character twice for defeating an enemy just because they dealt damage to them twice. In cases of bosses, you might deal damage to the boss, 100, 1,000 times, depending on what you're doing. And you probably don't want to give them 1,000 times the experience that the boss gives. So that's pretty much all the code changes we need to do today. But there'll be plenty in Blueprint to get this sorted. So if we switch back over to Unreal, build, compile, all that good stuff, then we need to do a few things. First of all, we need to assign our character in our take damage calls, like I mentioned earlier. We also need to determine our enemy's experience, set their default values for what they're worth, and know when we want to disable things like the health bar and the capsule collision and all those sorts of things. So again, it should be pretty simple. Let's go into each of these blueprints. First of all, let's go into our enemy, base enemy BP. Now, I haven't done it yet in this class, but really the base classes are supposed to be wrappers, just like I was mentioning with the code class. So really, we shouldn't have the pumpkin golem in here. We should have base enemy BP, and then the pumpkin golem can be their own class. However, I have another episode planned for making other enemy types, and so I'll hold off on that for now. Basically, if you go into any enemy that you have and go to class defaults right here, you can set your EXP worth right here. And just set it to be whatever value you want, however much you think the enemy is worth. You could do a range as well. So if, if you want to modify, so not all enemies have the exact same health. Maybe they have a range of between these health values, and you want to make your experience based off the health. You could also make it based off of the level that you are in comparison to them, that sort of thing. For now, we're not quite that advanced, so I just give it a default experience worth. Anytime it's defeated, all players that did damage to that enemy will get this much experience. Okay, that's simple there. And then let's look over our components that we have here. So we have a health bar, and we have a capsule component. The capsule component is what determines our collision. Because that's why before in the previous episodes, even after the enemy had died, their capsule collision component was actually still active, or just their collision in general was still active, and thus it was blocking the player even after they had died. And also their health bar was still active, which is why we could still see it. So if you go into your event graph on your base enemy BP, we have begin play here to spawn the health bar, and we had notify death, which basically would go through once this enemy was defeated, or really any enemy. It would grab the class type of the enemy, see if we had a quest currently out for that class type, and then update the objective. That stuff's all good. We're still going to want to do that. But on completed of this objective for each loop, I want to do other logic, say, okay, we've died, we're notifying the game of our death, but we also want to make sure that we disable the things we want to disable on the character. Again, like the health bar visibility and the actor's collision. So the way this works is I grab our health bar component, drag it in, and just say set visibility. I leave these both unchecked. The health bar doesn't have children, so I don't need to propagate to children. And the visibility, if I check it, it's true. Otherwise, it's false. Well, I want to make it invisible, so it's false. I'm going to do the logic above. I'm just going to type it in down below so you can follow along. But you can copy this logic. I'm just going to type it in case you have any trouble finding any of the nodes. For this other part, we want to disable collision of the actor. You could disable collision on the capsule component, but really, if they're dead, we don't really care. We can just set actor, enable collision, and just leave it unchecked to set it to false. Now, the reason I'm setting visibility on the health bar and setting actor enable collision as opposed to just like destroying these components or whatever is if you want them to respawn without creating a new instance. There's a few reasons for this. Say you have an enemy that revives themselves unless they're killed with a specific weapon, like a skeleton or something like that. Or say that you have an enemy that does intentionally respawn itself after some time, like it's literally the same enemy, and you just have 12 roaming about the world, and it respawns somewhere else. Yes, you defeated them. Yes, you want these things to occur. However, you may want to use it again for memory reasons, for actual in-game reasons, like I said, the skeleton coming back to life, that sort of thing. And so because of that, you may want to, I'm trying to be as lenient here as possible with the logic and not try to make it like super specific, super strict on what we can and can't do, because I'm in the base enemy BP. If you're in, if you never want to do that, then you can just destroy these components if you'd like. But since we're in the base, we want to support everything. So right now, setting it to be invisible, we could always make it visible again. Disabling the collision, we could always enable it again. So these are safe options. Now, what we want to do is also reward our player, or all of our characters that did damage to this enemy, with experience. And the way we do this is I take the characters to reward array. It's the T array we made in the code. I loop through it. And for each character in this array, I drag off and I call gain experience. This array is an array of the third-person tutorial character, so it will have the functions that we have. Gain experience is a function we made earlier in the series, so there you go. For the EXP amount, I take the EXP worth of the enemy. We're in base enemy BP, so I can go EXP worth and drag it in. And there you go. That's the base enemy BP logic done. Okay. But there's a few other things we have to do. We have to make sure that when we call take damage, we are passing in our character to know that we're the one that should gain experience. Otherwise, nothing will happen right now. So we should go to both our weapons. So I'm going to go to my base weapon BP. And I'm going to go to my character BP. My base character BP. There we go. I'm going to close the base enemy because we don't need it anymore. Okay, so in the base character BP, we have this on component begin overlap right hand collision. In fact, we should have a left hand collision as well. I don't know if we ever set it up fully. We did not. But theoretically, you could have a right and a left hand collision. And we were saying, you know, oh, if you use this attack and you're in this animation and you don't have a weapon, then cause this enemy to take damage. And then set collision to be disabled. Wait for it to go back to the return to idle before we can punch and deal damage again. That stuff's all good. However, this take damage node was taking in the enemy that we were hitting and taking our strength value, multiplying it by 0.2, and passing that in as the damage. Okay, so as far as this goes, this is good. However, we need to add the character responsible field. So this will be here on yours, but it will be empty. It'll look like that. You can leave it there and it won't hurt anything, but your character won't get experience for what they've done. This is specifically for dealing damage with the fists or any part of your body. Like if you have other moves that aren't related to weapons, so say you do a kick or some sort of jump attack, we need to make sure that the enemy taking damage knows that it's from our character. So all I do is I get a reference to self, literally type in self, get a reference to self, and then drag this into character responsible. For the base weapon BP, all weapons, the way that they deal damage is they check to see if their damage collider that the weapon has ends up colliding with an enemy. And then we see if the owner is a character. And if it is, then we call it take damage. And we have all this logic in here for how we're doing damage based on our base damage of the weapon and then our character strength value, multipliers. And then character responsible will also be empty here. So to fix that up, all I do is I drag off of, we had get owner and we cast it to third person tutorial character. Once we know that this owner is of this type, then we can just drag it right in. This is the exact type we need for the character responsible. So you don't even have to cast it again or anything. I already had a reroute node going into the strength value here. So all I did was bring off another reroute node, bring it over here, and drag it into character responsible. There you go, guys. That's all I got. That's pretty much all you have to do to make experience be work basically off of, you know, what characters or what players end up damaging an enemy, and also not allowing the enemy to be killed twice or proceed to block you or show their health bar after they are dead. They just become a dead character on the ground. We could also ragdoll their body at this point if you'd like. And we could despawn them after a specific amount of time. Both things we'll be covering. But yeah, that's pretty much it. We can level up after defeating enemies now. The experience should be equally rewarded. And we can change the experience level based on, you know, whatever enemy it is that we're fighting. So we have a lot more options in our game now from this simple fix. Alright guys, so I hope that helped you make some more logic for your enemies and experience. If it did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do. I really, really appreciate it. I also really appreciate, I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for continuing to support this series and this channel. I really appreciate it. It means the world to me. And I can't thank you guys enough. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. Be happy to assist you and give you some free tips and help if you ran into any problems. And anyway, guys, that's all I got. So once again, I'm Shawnthebro. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, my friends.